Hello, my name is Dr. Monica Flores. I'm a pediatrician in South Florida since 2001.
In pediatrics, we diagnose this all the time as a pre-diabetes, pre-diabetes. And it's a really frustrating thing to diagnose because even though I diagnose it, when I send them to the endocrinologist, they really don't do anything about it because they're not sick yet. They're in the process of developing disease. Usually in a perfect world, in a happy world, the food in, the nutrition in is going to equal our energy out. And that makes everybody happy, have lots of energy, we're able to sleep, we're able to learn. Most of us are overnourished. Whatever nourishing that we are is unhealthy foods, the processed foods. So we're looking at the
Taki, the Doritos, the sugar, candy, the lack of vegetables, the lack of fruit, water, etc.
When that happens, then this stops happening. Our body's made up of a whole bunch of cells, and a whole bunch of those cells get together and they make an organ like our heart, and then a whole bunch of organs get together and they make a body. This is what needs to be nourished in order for this to be healthy. So our cell has nucleus and has mitochondria, and mitochondria is the powerhouse. It is the one that makes energy. Here you are, you go ahead and you eat, you put a Snickers in, it goes into your stomach and it goes down here, and there's this organ called a pancreas, and the pancreas releases something called insulin in response to this food that has glucose in it. The pancreas releases the insulin. Why? Because on this cell, this sugar has to get inside of this cell. And the only way that it can get inside is that there's receptors on the cell membrane that go ahead and bind the insulin, and they open the doors for the glucose to come inside. When we have too much of this, the cell goes, no, there's too much. I can't do it. I can't work this hard. Nobody wants to work hard. Everybody just wants to work just enough. It stops the binding of the insulin to this receptor. And that is what you have when you have insulin resistance. You can no longer bind the insulin onto the receptor because the cell is overwhelmed. But the body goes, hey cell, you have to do it. You have to bring this sugar in, because if you don't bring the sugar in, that sugar is going to stay in our bloodstream, and that sugar in our bloodstream is really, really bad. And so what the cell does, it releases even more insulin. Insulin starts to go higher and higher and higher. It overwhelms the receptors and it opens the door. And it keeps doing that. More sugar, more insulin, overwhelm the receptors, open the door, and the cell gets more and more glucose inside of it, and it keeps doing that for years. So now we have a whole bunch of glucose inside the cell, filling it. The cell is supposed to bring that glucose into the mitochondria, and the mitochondria is supposed to make something called ATP, which is your energy. That's what gives you everything that you need to do to run every single system. When the mitochondria is overwhelmed with this, instead of converting the glucose into this energy, it starts to make it into fat. Now the cell is filled with fat. Instead of being a nice happy cell with mitochondria and nucleus and ribosomes and peroxisomes, now it's full with all this fat. Once it gets full with all that fat, it becomes very inflammatory, and it gets more likely to die. What we are trying to prevent when we say please eat healthy and exercise, or when we see that insulin just start to increase just even a little bit, we're seeing the beginning of this whole process that is taking the extra overnourishment that is being forced into the cell, that's making it be filled with fat and causing that cell to now be more at risk for either cell death or inflammation or disease. And in this case, when you fill it with fat and eventually that receptor no longer can bind, then what happens to the glucose? It sits out here. It sits out in your bloodstream. And then you have a whole bunch of sugar in your blood, and that is when you get diabetes. Okay. But this process of diabetes didn't start when you were 45. This process of diabetes, I see it in 12-year-olds. I see it in 10-year-olds. I've seen it in teens, so many teens with what we call pre-diabetes or insulin resistance. All right, so that in a nutshell is what's happening to your body when you are overnourishing. Hope this helps.